I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and I'm going to stop my share and we'll go from there. Okay. I'll start my video just so you folks can see me. So Dr. Primomo is a research scientist and vegetable breeder at the Vinland Research and Innovation Center in Vinland Station, Ontario, Canada. He's worked for over 20 years in plant breeding and genetics, and in 2011 and joined the Vinland Research and Innovation Center as a vegetable breeder, where his work is focused on developing greenhouse tomato varieties as well as sweet potato varieties that perform well under Ontario's environmental conditions, where he uses traditional breeding methods and current molecular technology. He has also been instrumental in the development of the sweet potato slip production system that is currently being used in Canada. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over, and we're going to learn how to produce slips in your own greenhouse. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Valerio Primomo. I'd like to thank Chuck for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to virtually meet all of you. Can you all see my screen?
We're good. Yep.
Okay, here we go. So today I'll talk about producing slips in your own greenhouse. So I'll start off with just some basic sweet potato genetics. So sweet potato belongs to the morning glory family. It has 90 chromosomes. Now this crop is self-incompatible. If you compare it to other crops like tomatoes, it's a selfer, so it's a lot of it is very inbred. But sweet potato is very heterogeneous because of this self-incompatibility. So in order to make crosses, it's very difficult or challenging to make manual crosses, to control the crosses. So breeders in like LSU or North Carolina actually use bees, as we do. In our poly nursery, we set up a beehive wherever we want to do our crosses, and away they go. Once the pollinations are done, by the end of the season, you'll see these black little pods, and within those, you'll get 1 to 2 seeds, as you see in the diagram in the picture below. So these seeds are very hard. They have a hard seed coat. The way to germinate them is you have to do some scarification to get them to germinate, and usually you get to propagate a variety that's developed, we have to do it through vegetative cuttings. So vegetative cuttings, they're also known as slips in the sweet potato world. These are used by commercial growers to transplant in the field to commercially grow sweet potatoes. Now in Canada, there is no slip production industry. Most of our growers in Southern Ontario, actually all of them, almost all of them, actually import them from North Carolina. And so over the years, a lot of the growers have expressed this desire to actually purchase or develop their own slips locally. So what are some of the advantages of developing your own slip production industry? So for Canadians, so what growers do, they send a transport truck down to North Carolina each year. So it's usually a couple of days. You also need a phytosanitary certificate, so you have to be very prepared. But because of this 2-day transportation, there's always a deterioration of the slips that they purchase. So because of this, they usually order 10 to 20% on top of what they actually need. Then, border control during this time, there could be delays. Also, some Canadian provinces, they actually can plant slips much earlier, usually mid-May. But in North Carolina, we find that slips aren't ready by mid-May, usually by the end of May, early June. Last year, they're actually even later. It was, I would say, the second week of June. They weren't ready until then. So this has caused, major delays in some years. Sometimes it's they can't even get sufficient quantities of slips for their desired varieties, just because a lot of competition with North Carolina growers or U.S. growers. Also, because in the U.S. they're produced in the field, there's a lot of exposure to pathogens and pests in the soil. Whereas if you do it in a greenhouse, there's less exposure to that and less spread of pathogens or viruses. And the other reason why we decided to do this was also to give the Canadian grower access to a Canadian adapted variety known as Radiance. So this is just a summary of the slip production cycle. So there's 3 years. The first year consists of acquiring virus index material, which is then used to produce G1 seed potato in the field. Now, the US nomenclature, the G1 seed potato is also known as foundation seed. And year 2, the G1 seed potato is sprouted in the greenhouse to produce G1 slips. And then these are transplanted in the field to produce G2 seed potato. And in the US, these G2 seed potatoes are known as registered seed. And then in year 3, these G2 seed potatoes are sprouted to produce G2 slips, which are actually the slips that are sold to growers to commercially produce sweet potatoes that are sold to consumers. So why use virus index plants? So, a grower could save some of their seed potato that's left over, but if you keep doing this time over time, what happens is there's an accumulation of viruses. And we also find that if you look sometimes into your seed potato, you'll see discolorations. These are actually mutations. And the third thing is you get a yield decline because of the overload of viruses, which actually reduces your yield. So in this picture, you'll see feathery mottle virus, which causes a decline in the yield. These are some of the symptoms on the leaves. Now, to get around this is why we use virus index plants. This is micro propagation of the mericlones. So these are checked for disease and mutation using molecular techniques, which confirms that they are virus-free. And this is the starting material used to produce your foundation seed or your G1 seed potato. So in areas like LSU or North Carolina, and now in Canada, we have a tissue culture facility up in New Liskeard, which is part of the University of Guelph facility. They store nuclear plants of all the varieties of sweet potatoes that they are maintaining for either the university or breeding programs. So these are virus index, meaning that they're clean, virus-free. They're true to type of that variety. Each year, if you're a propagator, as you know, there's quite a few in North Carolina, and we're trying to build this industry here in Canada. We do have one propagator starting in Alberta, and we have a few more who are testing this protocol for next season here in Ontario. But the starting material that you see here in the tubes, this is what the tissue culture facility will store. And then once a propagator is ready to start their cycle of producing slips, they can put in an order. And that consists of taking cuttings from these tubes and propagating nuclear mother plants into a bigger containers, which are then shipped to the propagator to continue their slip production method. So you can see here in the top corner, the top right-hand corner, this is what a propagator would order from a tissue culture lab. which is a cutting from the original plant, virus-free plant, which is cultured and then shipped to the propagator. Depending on the size of your operation, you could order anywhere from 100 to 500 nuclear plants, which are then transplanted into trays. Usually this is done by March, so you have to put in your order at least 2 to 3 months before that, so they can prepare the number of plants required. Now in Canada, these plantlets can at cost for the maintainer of the variety is usually $3 Canadian. However, if you're licensing the variety to a propagator, you can increase it to up to $10 to cover your maintenance fees at the tissue culture facility. And I think this is the same practice used also by North Carolina and LSU. Now, if you have a large operation where you're planting, let's say 300 acres, you probably need upwards of 1,500 plantlets to produce your foundation seed. Now, if you want to cut your costs, you don't need to order 1,500. You can order 100, 500, and then as you receive them, you let them grow. You can take cuttings from that, single node cuttings, and keep propagating until you have sufficient number of your nuclear plants for transplanting to the field. Now, when you transplant to the field, you're going to produce your G1 seed potato. On average, a plant will produce 1.5 kilograms or 3.3 pounds per plant. This will translate to about 2,200 kilos or 5,000 pounds of G1 seed potato if you're transplanting 1,500 plantlets. So once you get it in the field, you just follow standard sweet potato production methods. I'm just going to highlight what we do here in Ontario. The growing temperature requirements for sweet potatoes is anywhere from 18 to 35 degrees Celsius or 64 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The ideal is 77 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, sweet potatoes are susceptible to frost. You want to make sure the frost period has passed before you plant them. And you also want to make sure that, because they are sensitive to chilling injuries, so anything below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We find here in Ontario, at least for gradients, it requires about 1,600 growing degree days. For varieties like Covington and Orleans, we found that it requires about 1,900 growing degree days in Southern Ontario. This is just a map of Southern Ontario showing what the growing degree days is per region. So once you get it, so to get into the field, you need sandy or sandy loam soil. That's the preferred type. We used raised beds. Now, if you're doing transplant or virus index plants in the field, the best is to use black plastic mulch, raised beds. These are usually spaced 70 inches apart. If you don't have a bed maker, then your bare ground, raised bare ground is also sufficient. We typically use beds that are about 17.7 inches wide and 47 to 59 inches apart. And then within the in-row spacing, each plant is about 12 inches apart. Typically, we plant in Southern Ontario late May to mid-June. We plant about 12,000 to 14,000 slips per acre. This is on bare ground. If you're using plastic mulch, we typically use double rows, as you see in the bottom picture. And that increases, you can increase the density to about 15,000 to 18,000 transplants or slips per acre. So fertility recommendations, this is all based on soil tests. So you should get your soil test before planting season. Do it a couple of months in advance. Then depending on your soil test, you should apply appropriate fertilizer. And this should be done, through fertigation or side dressing. Typically at planting, we add about 60 pounds per acre of phosphorus and 100 pounds per acre of potassium. 14 days after planting, we use about 125 pounds per acre of potassium and 5 pounds per acre borax. And then 28 days after planting, 75 to 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen. Weed management is very important. So if you're using black plastic, you don't need to do as much weed management, but it's still required. As you can see here, in Ontario, many of the big growers do, large growers use mechanical weed management. At Vineland, we don't have this type of instrument. We usually do manual hoeing. We try not to make it get out of control. We can also use sprays like Command immediately after transplanting before they begin to root. We can also use post-emergent sprays such as Post to control grasses. And then, as I said, other weeds can be managed through manual hoeing. Then once the vines, start to spread and close in, this usually happens in late July. They tend to control the weeds. Also have to be mindful of pests. At Vineland and at least some of the smaller growers in Ontario, I'm sure the larger growers find it challenging. The ones that at least there's one grower that has 1,000 acres in Ontario, probably challenging to do a 3-year rotation. However, our experience is in the second year, we plant with winter wheat and rye in the spring and left fallow for the growing season. And then the third year, we plant with a blend of black oats, oriental mustard, brown breaker, radish, crimson clover, and Australian winter peas. So we do this 3-year rotation to help control any wireworms or grubs. One should avoid including corn and sorghum in the year before planting sweet potatoes, because this tends to attract white grubs. And if you can, fumigation of soil to control grubs and wireworms is recommended. If fumigation is allowed in your area. I know parts of Canada, fumigation, there's very few fumigants that are allowed to be used. So it becomes very challenging for some of the growers in Canada to control crops and using this method. Irrigation is important. As soon as you transplant the plantlets, you need about 25 mils of water applied through a wagon wheel attached to your transplanter or using overhead irrigation. It's very critical, I would say, in the first 6 weeks post-transplant. You need about 1 inch of water per week to ensure that you get proper root development. So at harvest, so this is a picture of our G1 seed potato at harvest. We usually, to do the harvest, we cut the vines about 3 to 7 days prior to harvest. This helps to harden the skin. As you know, as you harvest sweet potatoes, they have a very delicate, soft skin, which easily peels. By doing the vine cutting 3 to 7 days before that, it starts to help with the hardening of the skin. Now, some growers, if you have small operations, they tend to do this by hand as opposed to mechanically with a harvester. This reduces the chance of skinning. So once you harvest, to help ensure that the skins are fully cured, right after harvest, we cure at 26 to 29 degrees Celsius or 90 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit with a 95% relative humidity for about 10 to 14 days. And this is, again, variety development dependent. Now, the curing helps to toughen the skin, as I mentioned, and this helps for long-term storage. It helps to heal any wounds, and it also converts the starches to sugars. Now, this is required if you're going to produce your own slips, because you'll need to store it for about 6 months before you bring it out of storage to start sprouting them in the greenhouse. So you want them to last for those 6 months, and of course, you'll need to cure them. So once you've cured for those 10 to 14 days, you'll need to store them at 55 to 61 degrees Fahrenheit and about 85% relative humidity until you're ready to bed them in a greenhouse in March for sprouting. So to prepare for the bedding of the sweet potatoes in the greenhouse, if you have open space, you can use skids on the ground with some frames, 2x8 frames around them. Or if you have empty tables, raised tables, again, you could put a frame around them with some agro-mixed soil. You need proper drainage. Sweet potatoes don't like to be wet for a long time. They tend to rot. So you need proper drainage. And you can set up a dosatron system to help with the fertilization, with the irrigation of the sweet potatoes for sprouting during the season. So this is a setup at Vineland of our beds using the G1 seed potato that were pulled out in March. Now you have an option of pre-sprouting them for 10 to 14 days at 82 degrees Fahrenheit. We tend to not do that, but if you pull them out too late for whatever reason, you had some other crop there and you couldn't get it out, then pre-sprouting will help getting them move faster. But if time is on your side, then you can skip that option. We plant the seed potato in a bed of soil, at least 2 to 3 inches deep, and then cover with about 1 inch of soil. And we find that about 15 kilos or 33 pounds per square meter or per 10, sorry, that should be 10 square feet. So 1 square meter is about 10 square feet. Sorry, I was trying to convert from our metric system to your imperial system so you understand or can follow my presentation. So as you noticed, I've had both numbers in each of my slides. So you'll need about 33 pounds per 10 square meters. Per 10 square feet. So I would say after about a month, this is what you get. You get sprouting of your G1 seed potato. So these slips are your G1 slips. You can see on the right side, we've already cut those back and they've already started to regrow. You can see on the left side that this is their first growth. They're over a foot long, so they're ready to be cut back because this picture was taken when it wasn't planting time yet. So you'll find that you'll have to cut them back a couple of times. This helps with the strengthening of these slips for transplanting in the field. So you want to use a 2820 NPK and a 14014. You alternate each week for the first 6 weeks. During March, you'll need some supplemental lighting to help with the growth. Ideal temperature is 75 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. To control any pests such as aphids, you'll need to add some biologicals to control the pests. In Canada, there's very few approved methods for controlling aphids in the greenhouse. At this time, the only thing approved is a safer soap spray. Even that, we find that we don't get too much pressure with pests, so we find that the biologicals tend to control that very well. So once you're ready to cut and transplant, we find that you get about 280 to 300 slips per square meter or per 10 square feet. And it's possible to get 2 cuts. Once you do a cut, it'll take about 2 to 3 weeks to get the next cut if desired. Now you can see in this picture, we cut the left side and then the right side has regrown and ready for cut. Now these cutbacks, if you're not ready for planting, these cutbacks can be replanted if you have extra space. And this can be done through single node cuttings. And I'll talk about that in the next few slides. So I just want to show you a video of our system. I hope it works. Can you all see that? Should do. So these are already cut back, and you can see that they're regrowing, and you can see the seed potatoes that have been bedded in the soil. And we also have a black plastic that allows drainage so that to hold up the soil in the beds. And you can see that they're very nice, high quality slips. So in this case, because the industry we're preparing is for sale, these were actually cut. You can see these were previously cut and they've regrown. Because we're trying to establish an industry up in Canada, these were actually cut and then shipped to different parts of Canada. So this was just one part of our facility. All our cutbacks were actually were replanted as single nodes. So these are single nodes. You can see in the pictures that if you plant these single nodes in soil, they'll start to root and have new growth, and this will develop into a new slip. So if you don't have sufficient number of seed potato, this is one way to increase the number of slips you require. It's also maybe less expensive because you don't have to invest in the virus index plantlets that you have to order in order to start this whole process. Now, when you're using single node cuttings, you'll have to prepare beds, as I mentioned, and the density you have to plant that we find is about 200 cuttings or single nodes per square meter or per 10 square feet. So this method is used to do rapid bulking of your material. Also, it preserves any waste. So instead of throwing them out, if you have sufficient space to replant, you can do that. Or if you have grower friends that want to plant, you can either sell it to them, or if you're friends, you can just hand them over to them. So what we did with our single node cuttings, we have hoop houses up in Vineland, which we invested in to demonstrate how this works. So we took all our cutbacks and replanted them in a hoop house. So you can see here, these are all single node cuttings done by hand. We can just hire contract workers, bring in for a full day to replant them all. We have some plastic beds here. With an irrigation system, with a dosatron set up to water them. Again, you'll need lights in this March, April timeframe until you reach May when you can turn off the lights. So you can see here in the hoop house, they're ready for cutting. We have boxes to prepare them. We usually fit about 500 to 1,000 slips per box. So when your slips are ready to harvest when they're about 1 foot long, and you have to leave about 2 inches at the base. You don't want to cut where the soil is because you can easily transfer. In this case, because it was done in ground, you can easily transfer pathogens. Now, you'll need about 40,000 slips required. Now, I'm talking about, this is the year 2 when you're producing your G1 slips. Now, I said there's 3 years, so you want to produce now your G2 seed potato for the 3rd year. So to do that, you want to save some of your G1 slips and transplant about 40,000 of those to the field. This will produce about 60,000 kilos or 132,000 pounds of G2 seed potato in year 3. And this will produce enough slips to cover about 1 acre. So we rented a facility to do this. You can't see the whole acre, but trust me, there's an acre here of slips. This was back in 2018 when we did this. We planted the G2 seed potatoes. You need about 4,000 square meters or 1 acre to accommodate this 132,000 pounds of seed potato. And this can produce approximately 2.4 million slips for sale if you're in that space. If you're just doing your own thing for your own field, then obviously, depending on the size of your field, you'll need either more or less. So just to summarize here with the packing, in year 2, you're actually packing G1 slips if you're packing that or transplanting. In year 3, you're going to be packing either G2 slips, either packing or transplanting in the field, depending if you're in it for sales or producing your own slips. Now you're packing your boxes. So depending on the size of your box, like I said, you can fit about 500 to 1,000 slips per box. And North Carolina, a lot of the propagators are packing about 1,000 per box. And then during shipment, you'll need to store, they have to be shipped at about 14 degrees Celsius or 57 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a cost of production analysis by year and by production step. This first step, it all depends on the size of your operation. You may spend anywhere from, I would say anywhere from $300 to $1,000. Now this is all in Canadian. For the first step for your tissue plantlets, virus index material, anywhere from $300 to $1,000. But as you add everything up, total expenses for the 3 years, depending on the size of your operation. This is to do about, I would say about 250 acres of sweet potatoes. You're spending about 170,000 in expenses, producing 2.4 million slips. Your cost of production is about 7 cents Canadian. Now, if you're in the sales business, then depending on what profit you're looking at, you can sell it for 10 cents, 15 cents. It's all up to the individual. Now, these cost of production analysis is all based on, Vineland Research Innovation Center trials. Now, this may vary depending on the variety, the season, the location, and the cultural practices. We find that some varieties don't produce as many slips per square meter as others. This was all based on our variety gradients that was developed in Canada. And you also have to consider the rates of utilities and labor. It's probably much different in Canada than it is in the US. Now, I also want to indicate that we did publish, this is all based on a manual that was published on our website. So you're free to go to the Vineland website and download this production manual. There's a lot more information there. So it'll highlight all the equipment requirements and technical details I've gone over today. It gives you a step-by-step process. It gives you that cost of production broken down even more by each line item. And it also shows you potential revenue models depending on how much you intend to charge per slip. So I'd like to thank LSU, our collaborators, the Ontario government, and the University of Guelph for helping us with this project. And I'd like to also acknowledge the various people at Vineland that helped make this possible at Vineland. Does anyone have any questions?
I have one. Are you using any kind of bottom heat in any of the propagation from the G1 to the G2 slips?
So in the case of the hoop houses, we do not use bottom heat, and you can see the skids that were on the ground. We did not use bottom heat. There is one case where we had raised tables. There is bottom heat there. It just happens to be there, so it does help. The way it'll help you is instead of getting slips regrown in it'll just improve or make the production of the slip, the regrowth, much quicker if you have bottom heat. That's how it'll just speed it up. If you don't have it, it won't. It's not gonna. It's gonna be okay. It's just gonna take longer for it to regrow. So instead of 2 weeks, it might take 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks.
And I know you mentioned that certain varieties don't seem to produce as many slips. Which, in your experience, what varieties are the hardest to produce slips from?
Okay, so we included. So we looked at Covington and Orleans. We generally don't find any problems with those two varieties. Bellevue, if you've grown Bellevue, it's very challenging to produce slips. It's very slow.
Great. That is exactly what our experience has been too. So it looks like we're doing
Yep.
something right here too. If you do, if you can stay on, we've got a little bit of time set aside for later on at the end for more discussions and questions. If you can stick around a little bit.
Yeah, I'll stick around. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Okay. And then I'll just ask you to stop sharing your screen. Thank you. So we'll introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Max Morningstar, and Max and his wife Maria own and operate MX Morningstar Farm in Hudson, New York, which is in Columbia County, just south of Albany, where they grow and market organic vegetables through a farm store, farmers market, CSA, and then also wholesale. Max has been growing sweet potatoes for a number of years, and he's going to share his experience with growing, harvesting, and marketing sweet potatoes and what he's learned over the years. I've worked with Max for a little while, last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, and he does a great job with what he does. What's interesting and why I asked Max is that he's had some experience growing on mulch, plastic mulch, as well as bare ground. And right now he's growing all of his sweet potatoes on bare ground. And so we thought we would draw from his expertise as to how he does it. So with that, Max, you want to go ahead and share your screen?
You got it.
And unmute yourself, which is great.
Yep.
And it's yours. Take it away.
All right. Okay. So, hi everybody. So like Chuck said, my wife Maria and I run MX Morningstar in Hudson. And I'm going to kind of run through just an overview of our production of 2 acres of certified organic sweet potatoes. So we're a 35-acre organic vegetable farm. So sweet potatoes are a part of what we do. It's not our entire operation by any means, but our farm specializes in wholesale sales of storage crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and squash. And so they're a particular focus for us. So sometime around in April, early May, we start our bed prep. Typically, a crop of winter rye is flail mowed and tilled down with heavy disc and subsoiled before being perfecta-harrowed a couple of times to level it out. We're using Crayers 543 and sulfate of potash and a calcium supplement depending on pH levels. And then that's all getting perfecta-harrowed down and then rolled with a cultipacker to mark our rows. We're not currently growing on raised beds or hills, though that is something we're looking into adding in the future. So then last week of May or first week of June, depending on when the slips arrive, we will start planting right away. We aim to be planting our slips the day we get them. Or if they come in late in the evening, we'll we'll plant the next morning. But we are all bare soil planting. We plant with this old piece of junk mechanical 1000 transplanter, 36-inch rows, 12-inch in-row spacing. And we have kind of settled on our two varieties as being Covington and Murasaki. We grow substantially more Covington than Murasaki, just the yields. Murasaki is just a little bit of a long day variety for our area, especially being on bare soil. So we don't do as much of it, but we like to have it around to add some variety to our retail sales. Well, this picture is not really the best time to start setting up your deer fence, but the only real pest problems we have, other than white grubs and wireworms, which other than crop rotation, there's not really much we can do about it in an organic system, is deer. And deer are, they can be a real problem in a sweet potato crop. So the best thing to do is not set it up when you see me setting this one up. The best time to do it is right after you plant and you know they're rooted. Get the fence up, 2 strands, bait it, and just discourage the deer from ever going in the field, because they really like sweet potatoes and can do a lot of damage. Something I forgot to mention in the planting slide is we do overhead irrigate our slips after planting if rain is not in the forecast. But one of the things we found is compared to growing on plastic mulch is that there's a lot less transplant stress going into a bare soil bed than there is going into plastic. So if there's rain in the forecast, we don't typically have to worry about irrigating right after planting, but we we will do it if needed. So after that step is probably the most crucial piece of establishing a good sweet potato crop for us, which is weed control. We're using I wish I had a photo or video of the cultivator working, but unfortunately I didn't in sweet potatoes. So we will run a Cult Cress Argus with finger weeders through it weekly, sometimes more, depending on how the weather's been going. If it's raining a lot, we'll run it more often. If it's dry, we get to run it less often, but generally about once a week for 4 weeks. And then it's usually time to send a crew of people through to do manual weeding and hoeing to get weeds that the cultivators may have missed. And then we will, after that, usually the plants are vining out to the point where we don't want to use the fingers anymore, and we'll switch over to using a Danish tine cultivator on the rear to cultivate in between the rows and move some soil in row. That's usually about 2 weeks worth of work before they've vined out to the point where we can't get a machine through. This picture you're looking at here, this would have been probably shortly after the last or right before the last cultivation run with the Danish tines. And then typically we do have to go through again by hand. The second run through is pretty quick. That's just to make sure that anything that got missed in the first round that maybe was below the plant canopy that shot up through, that we get that out. That's for weed seed control, but also we have found that one of the biggest factors in yield for us is our weed control in sweet potatoes. Though they're a vigorous plant, but they don't actually compete with weeds very well. You kind of want to look at them almost like a winter squash plant because of how they grow, but they're really not that aggressive and don't compete well. They're easily shaded out by the few weeds you can see poking through the rows. So depending on how many people and of course which people go out to weed and the season, it's anywhere from 30 to 40 labor hours per hour per acre. But this is definitely one of the most important steps for us, and one that we've messed up before. And we really regret it when we don't find time to get out and make sure that those quick weeding jobs get done. So then starting around October, we may get started a little bit earlier selling fresh sweet potatoes, but this is kind of focusing on the main harvest. We will flail mow the vines down, and then we run through the beds with a toolbar mounted with 3 oversized coulters on it. It's actually our undercutting bar, but with the lifter removed, and have 3 oversized coulters on it to cut the vines in between the rows and in the wheel tracks. And we usually leave them out there to desiccate for about a week before we start lifting and harvesting. So we lift with a undercutting bar, and then the plants are picked by hand and sorted into 2 grades, kind of A grade and the small ones. We do have a market for what we call fingerling sweet potatoes, and those are culled out and put into separate storage bins for other sales. And so they're picked up by hand into buckets and then sorted into 2 sizes and put into, most of them go into 30 bushel cardboard pumpkin bins, and then some go into wooden 20 bushel bins for the curing process. So after we get through the harvest, which in a good year we'll do about 20,000 pounds to the acre. More typical for us is around 15. If we've done a decent job with the weed control and it hasn't been too cold. Here is our super high-tech curing chamber. So this is one of those things where we definitely know we could do it better, but given the tools we have, this is kind of the best way we figured it out. So the bins come in usually in batches, about 8 to 12 at a time, go into the propagation greenhouse, where they're moved in with a forklift and covered in 6mm greenhouse plastic. We've got electric heaters and circulation fans running underneath the plastic, and then it's weighted along the edge, and there's a fresh air fan pulling fresh air in from outside the plastic in, and that's what's causing the inflation inside the plastic. We have a thermostat in there monitoring the humidity and the temperature, and then it's my job to kind of check it and adjust the settings on heaters and ventilation kind of multiple times a day, depending on how hot and sunny it is outside or cold and gray, and keep an eye on the humidity and make sure I'm adding water, which in the way we're doing it is really just with a hose. And adjusting it manually. And this goes on for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, depending on what the conditions have been and how good a job we're doing maintaining those conditions of 85-90% humidity and 80 to 85 degrees. After that, they're moved into a storage room, where we keep them along with other fall crops, kept at about 60 degrees, relatively dry holding container. And then the bulk of our sweet potatoes actually leave the farm in 30 bushel bins, direct from the storage room, or even direct from curing, depending on how quick they're going to be sold. So our biggest customers are other farms, which bring in the dirty bins of sweet potatoes for sales throughout the fall and the winter to either CSA or farmers market or farm stands. And so the vast majority by weight leave the farm that way. The smaller grade fingerlings, those are typically sold to distributors who are working with restaurants. And then we keep a fair bit back for our own winter retail sales and winter CSA sales. We have found in general, sweet potatoes is one of the easiest crops for us to market, and it's definitely one that we're trying to get better at and increase our acreage of, so that we can fulfill more of these customers. And that is pretty much the quick run through of our production systems. And I wanted to go over some things that we've kind of learned along the way. In terms of areas that we try to focus on, weeds is definitely the largest threat we have to getting good yields out. And that's why we try to do a good job of making sure those manual weedings, like nobody likes to send people out to weed big fields of sweet potatoes, but if you're on time with your cultivation and really stick to the schedule, generally speaking, we don't find those hand weeding sessions to be too arduous, and it's usually 2 or 3 people for a day and a half go out and take care of it. But it's really important that you make that happen, because your yields will go down if you let that crop get weedy. Calcium and potassium seem to be the most important nutrients for us in terms of getting a good quality, a good shape root. We are shooting for a kind of number 1 grade sweet potato. So we want a consistent, smooth root and not too many jumbos. And we found that making sure that our calcium and potassium levels are kept up are a big help with that. Good airflow at curing. This is something that we learned after doing our curing in a shipping container that didn't have good airflow. I think in a different setup, it could have been fine if it had been had a forced air system in it. But we've ended up in previous years doing various things for curing where they cure relatively quickly, but they'll be without good airflow pushing through the bins and constantly moving through the storage area where they're being cured. You'll end up with kind of a almost fermented flavor to the roots after they come out, and they need a little bit of time in storage to convert before they go and get sold. So making sure that you've got good airflow in your curing area is definitely important. It is challenging with having to maintain high humidity and high temperatures, but it's not something to skip on. And again, going back to what we're looking for as a grade, because we're selling to other farms and stores that are looking to sell to retail customers and CSA customers, our in-row spacing is really designed to decrease the number of jumbo sweet potatoes that we have. If you were selling to, depending on the market you're going to, you may want your sweet potatoes to be a little bit larger. You could space those out a little bit more, which would decrease your cost on your slips. It would also reduce the number of little ones, what we call the fingerling grade sweet potatoes. But we found that this spacing kind of gives us the best spread for the customers that we have. So we've learned a lot. And one of the things we definitely have learned is there are things that we need to do better. One of those things is we currently are growing in a flat top planting surface. So just perfecta harrowed and packed with a roller to mark the rows. And we do some zone tillage with a subsoiler to make sure that we've got really good tillage, really good tilth for that 8 and 10 inches right below the planted row. But ideally, we'd be growing in ridges, and if not that, a raised bed. But we'd like to take steps towards moving to ridge culture, getting the plants elevated a little bit, which would allow for easier harvesting and vine elimination. But we need to invest in some cultivation equipment specific to ridge culture before we make the move. We tried that without making those weeding investments one year, and it was messy. So that's one thing we could definitely do better. Another is, and these top 3 things on the screen there are all related to each other, but vine elimination, our system of a flail mower and the coulters on a toolbar does work, but obviously it would work a lot better if we had a roto beater or a sweet potato vine topper, or even a potato hop topper. Would definitely get us a better removal of the vines ahead of lifting, because the vines definitely slow down both the hand lifting part, but also clog up equipment. And unless you have special sweet potato harvesters, which are designed to better handle it, standard potato diggers or bed lifters are going to have trouble with the extra debris from the vines. So doing something to get better at vine elimination, and then ultimately mechanizing the harvest, so we're not doing as much of the lifting by hand. We have tried with our Spedo potato digger to lift sweet potatoes, but we found, because of how deep we needed to set the digger, and because of the debris, the vine debris that was still in the field, that the amount of time we saved didn't actually justify the amount of damage that was done to the roots. Even after 5-7 days of sitting out after the vines have been cut, they're still very, very delicate. So we didn't see a significant labor savings enough to justify the amount of damage we found on the roots. So we're still hand lifting, but as soon as we figure out those other 2 things, getting into ridges and vine elimination, we'll be able to start working towards mechanically harvesting. And as much as we've done a good job with our low-tech curing, it would be really great to have a dedicated chamber, be it a shipping container fitted with the right exhaust fans and heaters, or a dedicated room in one of our barns that's designed to cure the sweet potatoes. This is mostly because we have nice quality product come out of our low tech curing setup, but it would make the process a lot smoother if we could just move it in, set a temperature, and know that things were going right. We could probably get them in and out of the curing room a lot faster, and also have a nicer product at the end. So those are all the things that we're moving towards, that we'd like to see. We do shoot to have sweet potatoes for sale straight through the winter months into the spring. So the better the cure, the better the storage is on the farm. So let's see how I did on time. Looks like I did okay.
You did excellent, Max. Excellent.
Yeah, great. So that's the run through of our system, and I was just going to leave it with that and see what kind of questions we had after that. And Chuck, I don't know if you're going to read them off the chat room.
I am.
Right,
So
great.
we had one question from Sue about your spacing, and I thought you had said it was 36 between rows and 12-inch in row, but I wanted to double check.
Yes, that's right. 36-inch rows, 12-inch in row.
Now, Max, have you? I guess I thought you had grown sweet potatoes on plastic before. Have you not?
I have grown sweet potatoes on plastic before.
Okay.
And we haven't done much of it though. My experience growing on plastic was that, and again, a lot of this is ultimately going to come down to grower preference and, space and where, your location, how warm you are, what kind of soils you have. But in our experience, the amount of work that went into both the plastic laying, the irrigation was a factor in why we decided to move away from plastic mulch. With being on this really well-drained ground, even if it's raining, you better be irrigating on plastic mulch. And we just kind of found the headaches of removal and irrigation management didn't really justify any kind of yield increase. We also found that we get pretty darn good yields growing on bare soil. So we don't do any of it. Now we may do some experiments this coming season on Murasaki grown in plastic to see if we can make that yield any better.
Great, because that was the question was Simon wanted you to talk a little bit more about your experience planting on plastic, and Andrew wanted to know why you moved away from plastic culture. So I think you covered that. Simon, I can answer a few of those questions. Yes, it would be better to lay plastic in advance to let that soil warm up. It doesn't have to be that long. And we typically plant, and Max, you can chime in on this one too, but when we plant our slips in plastic, we try to get as many nodes in the ground as possible because each node is yield potential.
Yeah.
So just leave that. You just leave basically that top leaf essentially to the top of the soil is what we've done in the past. Max?
Yeah, we shoot for a minimum of 2 nodes going into the ground, which is definitely a little bit easier on bare soil using the style of planter we're using, but 2 or 3 is what we're aiming for to get in the ground.
Yeah, and when they do get transplanted, it is what we recommend is that you have really good soil moisture in those beds when you start. Also, if you have irrigation overhead, especially if you can set that up, if you get a good sunny day and it's beaten on that plastic and you've planted, you can see some burn back, but usually these things are fairly resilient. I'm amazed every year the torture we put these slips through, and they seem to come out fine. Spraying surround, could be an option to kind of cool that plastic a little bit. And as far as when they start to size up, it depends a little bit on variety, but just lots of times you will not see these plants flower. They will just continue to vine, and really they'll, as soon as they kind of get to a point where they have enough foliage, they'll start to expand those roots or size them up a little bit.
We typically see flowers in early September on ours, and we usually start harvesting fresh market sweet potatoes, which we don't cure. We just harvest by hand and bring directly to market. We usually start doing that the second week of September.
Last week of August.
Or last week of August. I'm being corrected.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
We had one more question of how soon before or after a first frost should they be harvested? And I'll let you answer that one, Max, and I'll see if I agree with you.
So I'm gonna basically to answer that question, I'm gonna just repeat what Chuck tells me every year when I forget and text him, which is we have found mostly that we have to worry about soil temperature, not so much whether or not the leaves and vines got burned. We almost always have frost during sweet potato harvest. This year, I think we took it, we had a pretty good cold snap in late October. The vines were black, didn't look real nice, but soil temps were still above 50 after that frost, and the tubers coming out were just fine, sitting out through some cold nights. So I know that the conventional wisdom is if you get a frost, you got to go out there and get those sweet potatoes out right away. We've found that there's a lot more leeway with that than people are led to believe, unless the soil temps are dropping, and then you really want to get those out, so you can end up with a hard core in the center of the sweet potatoes, and that's really unpleasant. How'd I do, Chuck?
You did excellent. I think you could probably do my job. How's that sound?
Great.
Yeah, not only that, but if those even in storage, if those roots get cold, and 55 is usually my cutoff, they will actually start to develop, because they are in the milkweed family, they will start to develop the white milk on the inside of the, in those roots, and that can actually be quite bitter as well. So you don't want to let it get to that point either. So Chuck Mead wants to know, is your airflow better during curing in the pumpkin bins or the wooden bins?
It's definitely better. It's definitely better in the wooden bins than it is in the pumpkin bins. Our pumpkin bins, we do this kind of silly thing every year where we set up all the bins, and then I stand there with a 2.5-inch hole bit on a drill and drill holes in them to increase the airflow. If we were a bit more set up, we would probably like to cure them in wooden or macro bins, and then transfer them to other bins for sale. But because so many of them leave the farm to go directly to customers, we just kind of deal with the airflow problems created by the pumpkin bins to save us the ease of having to transfer and handle those sweet potatoes any more than we need to before sending them to the customer.
Great. Thanks, Max. So I think with that, Max and Maria, are you guys going to be able to stick around for a few minutes?
Yep.
Great. So I think we'll move on to the next speaker, because God knows that he is long-winded, and I don't mean you, Max, I mean myself.
Oh yeah. All right.
Come on now. So we'll start. Come on, let's see here. So again, bear with me 1 second here, because I thought I was all ready too. All right. Share. All right. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the trials. We had 3 trials this year with sweet potatoes. One of them was a variety trial. The other one is following up on Dr. Primo's information on producing slips locally. And then the last one is just a slip quality trial that we've worked with on for the last couple of years. So the first trial that we'll talk about is our variety trial. We looked at 9 varieties at 2 locations. We looked at in Columbia County, so just a tiny bit north of where Max is, at Mascot Orchards in Kinderhook. And we looked at, these are all grown on raised beds with plastic, as you can see in the picture. All these slips were purchased from Jones Family Farms down in Bailey, North Carolina. We use 6.5-foot bed centers. We also do something a little different. And Max made a great point about spacing his plants, and the spacing that he uses works for him. We're kind of looking at how spacing on plastic affects not just yield, but really the overall quality of those roots. And Max made a great point of that. So we have 2 planting configurations. So we either have a single row right down the middle of the plastic where the plants are 12 inches apart, or we do a double staggered row where we plant 2 rows, essentially 18 inches apart on the plastic, and then 12 inches in row. So that's our kind of our 2 treatments, at least this for the Columbia County site. These were planted June 4th, and then we harvested September 25th. And if you remember, the end of September, we had, at least for us, we had 2 days where we dipped into the upper 20s. So it got pretty chilly for us. And these potatoes went through that cold and then got harvested right after that. All right. So our second site was actually on muck soil or black dirt down in Orange County, at our cooperators of Morgowitz Produce in Goshen. Same thing. These are the same slips that we used. I just trucked some down to Ethan to get them planted. These were also on mulch, but these were flatbeds, so they were not raised. And we only used the double row system in Orange County. These were planted a day before on June 3rd and harvested also a day before on September 24th. So once we harvest, they are put into some mascots have a barn that they use, and they do a really great job of curing and good air movement and temperatures. And then we actually grade each one of these by hand. And on the bottom, you can kind of see our grading system. So we have jumbo roots, which are 32 ounces or bigger. Then we move to what we call our large roots, which for me is kind of the sweet spot. That's what we're looking for. And those are anywhere between 14 and 32 ounces. And then we have a small category, which is 4 to 14. And then I'm not sure who coined the fingerling term, if it was Max or us first, but I'll take credit for it. So those are our fingerling category, which are anywhere between 1 and 4 ounces. So that's how we grade them. As I said, everything is weighed individually and counted. I always like to put this up. This is total marketable weight. So not root numbers, but by weight of all the varieties on the different bed configurations. And as you can see, Max is right. Sometimes it doesn't really make a huge difference on total yield or overall yield. But where it does make a difference, and I don't have a graph of it, but we'll talk a little bit about, is on the root quality. So again, I think most of us are probably looking for that root that's anywhere between 3/4 to a pound, maybe a little bit bigger. For fresh market consumption, you get much bigger than that, and they get a little unruly, so to speak. But you can see that this year Bayou Bell and Burgundy and Beauregard all did very well for us. Mersaki is one that we like it, but again, we just can't seem to push the yields out of it as either even on plastic. So we're still visiting that one to figure out how we can push a little more yield out of that one. So this is our Orange County site. So remember, Orange County only had one. It was just a double row and a little bit different situation here. Avere did very, very well. It was our highest yielding and is actually a very nice sweet potato in general. One of the things I'll mention about Avere is on our mineral soils, we have a really, really hard time getting it established. It is a very finicky plant. But on the black dirt, it seemed to just take right off in that nice loose soil. But on our mineral soils, on that plastic, we have, even when we go through and replant, and we will replant these for the first week or so to make sure we have the stands that we're shooting for. But even then, Avere usually ends up with fewer plants per plot than the rest of the varieties. So again, I'll just run down through each one of these very quickly. Again, what's funny is we've kind of decided over the last 3 or 4 years that most of these varieties all taste very similar, with the exception of a few. Avere it's a standard, very nice looking orange. It's actually a very nicely shaped root. A lot of the large roots can have kind of some veinage, or those that just makes them not look as attractive as others. And again, as I said, it just tends to be hard to establish on mineral soils for some reason. Not sure why. It's in about the middle on our mineral soil yield, but again, it was first in our Orange County or black dirt yields. Bayou Bell is one that I've liked the last couple of years. It's a little bit different colored skin. It's more of a dark reddish purple skin, beautiful flesh. The one thing with this one is it can produce a lot of these long, thin roots. And if you look in the lower picture, you'll see what we call a lot of these, we call them intestines, which is probably not the best term to use, but we tend to get quite a few of these long, really long, elongated roots. When they're straight, they're okay, but when they get all these twists and turns in them, it gets hard to market them. This was our highest yielding plot in our mineral soils, with just under 50,000 marketable pounds per acre. So pretty impressive variety in terms of yield. It can produce a lot of nice roots, don't get me wrong, and I like the color, and I think it is one that I would consider growing in any normal year. Beauregard has been a standard for years. A lot of us have gone away from it for the simple fact that we've got some improved Beauregard varieties. In particular, one of them is Covington, which you've heard already mentioned. And again, Beauregard is it's a standard looking potato. One of the things that Beauregard will do is throw a lot of jumbo roots, a lot of large roots. We can minimize a little bit of that by, going to that double row. And that again goes to, Max's point of root quality and spacing. So that's again something to consider as you move forward. Beauregard, if it's one that, if you can't get other varieties that you want, I'm not going to discount Beauregard as a good variety to grow when you need something. But as I said, if you look at almost half of the one row roots were jumbo sized. So if you've got a processing market or restaurants that want to process them or make French fries, by all means, Beauregard would probably be a good variety to go ahead and try. So Bellevue is one of the newer ones on the market. Our cooperators in Kinderhook, the mascots, really like this one. It's different looking in that it's a bright orange. It's a very light orange skin. It's funny because you either get very bulbish shaped roots, as you can see in this top picture, or you get kind of these long, thin ones, or you get these tapered ones as well. Two row again was more uniform, and shape was less of an issue. The one thing that we noted, as well as some mascots, is that this one does not skin as badly as the others when you mechanically harvest them. The skin just doesn't get those abrasions as bad. The other thing to note on this variety is it was bred to be a storage variety. So if you dig this and sell it right away, the flavors will not be there. But if you start moving it in December, January, February, March, the flavors really develop, and it's a very good variety. I know at some mascots in their production field, Bellevue was the best variety that they had in terms of yield this year. And it's one that I know that they kind of continue to increase in acreage every year. So again, if you need to store them for long term, Bellevue would be one that would definitely be one to take a look at. So Burgundy, again, is kind of along those Bayou Bell. It's a little bit darker red, purpley skin. Nice long roots. Again, they size up. They can be a little bit lumpy. Decent yield. Again, it was second in our mineral soil, fourth in our overall yield for Orange County. Again, if it's one that you need, if you can't get what you want, again, Burgundy would be one to move up in the ranks for that. Covington has kind of been our standard for the last few years. Although I will tell you this year it was very disappointing. Usually it's in the top for yield. Not sure what happened, but it did well in the Orange County trial, but in our mineral soil trial, it lacked a little bit. Again, this is one that we found two rows tend to do better. Again, it's that two row double staggered row, produce much more uniform and consistent size roots. So again, Covington is one that has kind of been our default, and I would definitely continue to recommend growing Covington. Murasaki, you've heard a lot. You heard Max mention it. And this is interesting because this is a white fleshed variety. So it's kind of a purpley skin, a little bit of netting, but it's a very, very attractive white flesh and it's a lot drier compared to the orange flesh varieties. To me, my opinion, this is one of the best eating varieties that you can grow. It has really vigorous vines, so you need to pay attention to, I think, your fertility, because I think what may be happening is, it's a long season variety. It's a vigorous variety, and if you over fertilize, I think you're just going to push the plant and not really bank on those roots sizing up. Again, you can see it's a low yielding. It's bottom in the mineral soils, and I should say in the top 3 on the bottom, I guess would be the better way to put it. And it was the lowest yielding in our black dirt trial. NC 531. I don't know. I'm torn about this one. I love the shape. I love the size. It's got a really interesting growth habit where all the other varieties we talk about are very vining and just take over. This one is more of an upright type plant. It grows more like a bush, which is interesting. The other thing that we notice is when you first dig this, it's got a lot of elephant hide, what we call elephant hide. But then once you cure it, it seems to disappear. So I love the shape on this one. The other thing that we are being told about this variety is that it's supposed to have some insect resistance. So again, we may continue to look at it, but I'll tell you, it is one of the lowest yielding varieties. Continues to be. This is the 3rd year where it has just been in the bottom. So it's kind of hard for me to recommend this one yet until we get a little more information on it. So Orleans, again, is more like a Beauregard, probably even bigger. So, nothing stupendous about this variety. But just know, again, if you have a restaurant trade or processing trade, Orleans would be one that you could certainly grow and get very large roots with. So with that, I'll move on to our second trial. And that's really why I had our first speaker kind of talk a little bit about producing slips. One of the issues that we've had, especially in the last 10 years or so, is a lot of our growers are having issues sometimes with getting good quality slips or getting slips of the variety that they want. Most of the slip production is in North Carolina, and they're growing for their own growers down there, as well as in Louisiana and Virginia and the other Carolinas. So, if there is an issue, weather issue, and things get flooded out down there or wiped out, they kind of, and they take care of their own, is what I like to say. And so slips that may have been slated to come north will go to, get the planting acreage back up down there. You'll eventually get them. It's just going to be a lot later. So I just think if we can figure out a way to produce our slips here, it gives us that control. Get the variety you want, get it when you want. And that also has been an issue, because it seems like every time slips are ready to be delivered, we have a week of rain, and it's hard to get out there to make those beds, or it's hard to get out there to get your stuff planted. And so what do? You bring your slips, and they start to heat. If they're delivered, they get slimy, and you start to lose quality on those slips. And really too, it's shipping costs. I know that for some of our growers here locally, Adam Hayner's been making a trip down to Jones and has been bringing slips back, which has really cut, that time from getting slips to getting them planted, and it's been great. But it's still, it's still a cost, and so we can, try to eliminate some of that cost. I think it would be worth it. We've also found that there's no lag time. So when we take plants, cut them, and then put them right in the ground, man, they just take right off. Last year, we had extremely good luck. We increased our yield quite a bit. But, and again, it stands, just making sure that you get the stands that you're needing to get. Again, if you have, missing plants, and you're not going back through to replant, you may end up with a lot of those, jumbo roots or roots that are too big that you just don't know what to do with. So it just goes back to that, making sure you get the stands that you're looking for. And there's costs and there's a lot of other factors that probably go into, but those are the ones that kind of come to my mind first. Just not being, I guess, that's the word I'm looking for. It not beholden to those southern slip sources to get our slips here, I guess is what I'm really keen in here on. So for this one, we did not use any certified rootstock. We took a lot of the roots from last year's variety trial, the variety trial in 2019. We saved them. Covington, B14, Bayou Bell, and Mersaki is what we chose. We took and planted these May 18th, 2020 into the plastic collapsible bins with the dimensions. As you can see, they're about 22 inches long, 14.5 inches wide, and 7 inches deep. And what I did is I took an old piece of row cover, laid it on the bottom so that the soil mix didn't go through. Filled it with 2 inches of Pro Mix and then kind of laid the roots in there, covered it with another 3-4 inches of potting mix, and then watered it, and then placed it in a heated greenhouse. So that's kind of what our process was. You can see there's up here on the top, there's a bin that's all been seeded, ready to go. Cover them up, threw them in the truck, and then ran them down to the greenhouse. I did not have any bottom heat, so this was only the heat that was in the greenhouse. Sides were down, and it was usually closed up, so it was usually pretty warm in that greenhouse. They were also not pre-warmed, so pretty much whatever they were in the storage when I took them out, which was about 60 degrees, they sat in my garage for a couple days where they might have warmed up a little bit more, and then we went ahead and got them bedded up and put in the greenhouse. So one of the things that I've learned is that these varieties can be all over the place as to how many slips they produce. But one thing that I have learned, and this was from some of the Canadian research, is that once they start to kind of develop this far along, to cut those off actually makes for more plants or more slips to be produced, but also it makes them more uniform, which is critical, I think, in this whole process. So the first time, so I will tell you that May 18th to get these planted is way too late. And that was not done on purpose. With research and Cornell University and COVID this spring, we were a little bit on the fence as to what plans were going to be and how much field research we were going to be able to do. So we actually got these started just about, I'm going to say 3 weeks later than I really probably would have liked to have. So that's going to be an underlying theme for the rest of this presentation about the slip trial. We just did not get these planted when we should have. But with that said, so it took about, for our first cutting, about 36 days. So June 22nd, with the exception of Covington, so Bayou Bell, B14, and Mersaki, we were able to take our first cutting on June 22nd. I cut these, we graded them, and then I only use single rows for this trial and only large slips, and I'll explain that to you. Now, these are all compared to slips that we purchased from Jones Farm that were planted on June 3rd. All right, so those slips are already in the ground. They've been growing for almost 3 weeks. And so June 22nd, we come in with our slips and we go ahead and plant. So when I said large slips, so we graded all of these into small, medium, or large. And essentially a small slip needed at least 2 to 3 nodes, medium 4 to 5 nodes, and then a large had 6 nodes or more. So we were really keen in on large slips is what we wanted to plant. And you can see what we harvested off of those bins for the first time. So, you know, in upper 50s, lower 50s for most of these varieties. And you'll see that these medium slips did okay too, and I'll show that data in a minute. So really, it's these two categories, the large and the medium slips, is what we were keying in on. If you look down here in the bottom, you'll see there's our three categories or grades. Starting on the left are large, middle is medium, and then on the end are small. I bunched them, threw them in the truck, and headed right down to some mascots where we planted. This is immediately after planting, and I should have known better. The day, June 22nd, it was 94.9 degrees. So on that plastic, probably it was well over 115, 120. The two previous days was 90 plus, and then right after we planted, it was well into the 80s. And as soon as I got done planting, these things got just a really quick thunder shower, and it was, I mean, it was just plain and simple steamy. Soil conditions were a little on the dry side when these got put in the ground. So really, I should have held off, but I didn't. I guess I was just really wanted to get them cut, get them in the ground, and see what they would do. Again, keep in mind that this is 3 weeks after we would have normally have planted or would have liked to have ultimately planted. So I don't think this would be the case in a normal year when we're planting in late May, early June. And as you well know, that this year was very hot, especially in June. So should have known better. But we came back July 1st, so really 9 days after the first cutting. And I was amazed at how quickly these things grow back. A second cutting, you can see the numbers, you know, well doubled in some cases. Some were about the same, but you can see that they grow back very quickly, which I think is interesting, and I think we can use to our advantage. Because I think we can do multiple plantings to help space out our labor a little bit, and also maximize, you know, producing our own slips. So July 1st, I went right down. They got planted, and on the 15th of July, I did stand counts, and you can see that I did not replant anything from Jones Farm that was planted on June 3rd. Okay. But these were all slips that were planted July 1st, stand counts. So that second cutting that I took, and you can see that we have 100% stands of the slips that we grew, and pretty good stands of the varieties that we grew from Jones that were planted June 3rd. So please, I really want to emphasize to take this data with a grain of salt. Again, we were planted 3 weeks after those, actually even longer, almost a month after the Jones Farm slips. So our yields really showed it. But what's interesting is if you look at the number of roots, the root numbers for the varieties between the New York slips that we grew and the Jones Farm roots were not that different. So they were there, but they were just a lot smaller. So a lot of them either got kicked into, you know, that fingerling category, or they were just smaller average size in general. As you can see over here on that right-hand column, average size was really reduced. But with that said, I'm just not giving up. So when all is said and done, if you wanted to know how many slips, because I did a third harvest on these slips because we had so many of them. You can see the potential. You can also see I recorded the weight of the roots that were in each of those bins. So if you wanted to see how many pound or how many slips we can produce per slip, or per pound of root, I should say, or per square foot, there they are. But that's on 3 harvests, and I would think that 2 harvests would be plenty. So again, you know, those marketable yields were just low because of a month discrepancy in the planting dates, just not being able to get those New York slips in the ground when we wanted to. Root numbers were similar. I think we have a opportunity to produce a lot of slips in a small amount of area. And I think we also have the potential for 2 cuttings and 2 plantings. And again, we can plant a little bit earlier if we have our slips ready to go. Nothing that says we can't plant in the 3rd week of May if soil temperatures are warm enough and we have no frost advisories out there. So I don't have any issues with that. And I do think they take off better. So those stands are complete. And again, I'm just not giving up. Take some of the things that we learned this year, last year, and then some of the things that we've learned from the Canadian folks that are doing it, and put that all together and try to make it work. I know everyone's probably wondering about the economics, and really, there's no difference between planting our own and when we purchase them. When you consider the shipping and everything, this takes into account everything. This is shipping. This was producing soil requirements. It doesn't include greenhouse required for the energy. But if we can, where we will save money, in my opinion, is on that shipping. If you can get a bulk bin of slips, so about 600, 700 pounds in a bulk bin shipped up. We asked a couple shipping companies, and it's going to be about $150 to get them shipped up. You can produce a lot of slips out of those 600 pounds in those bins. So we can save some money, and I think make up for any greenhouse costs that might be associated with that. So the final trial that we looked at, when you get a box of slips, there is just about every size slip that's in that box. So the last couple of years, I've really wanted to kind of dive into what's the impact on slip quality in terms of the number of nodes that you plant on everything, yield, overall root quality, etc. So again, we used, this was all with Covington, and these slips were all planted June 3rd in the double row system on raised beds with plastic mulch. And again, we use that same category system. A small slip would be one that was 2 to 3 nodes, medium 3 to 4 nodes, and large slips with 7 nodes. So what we did is we took a box, we graded all the slips out to figure out essentially what are you looking at in a box, in terms of percentages of those different categories of slips. So if you look at it percentage wise, about a third will be large, a little over half will be medium, and about less than a third will be small. Number wise, that's about what it breaks out to per 1,000, which is usually what's in a box. And then if you look at our stands, and this is where I think it comes into play, is large and medium slips. We get about 100% to 95% of our stands. And again, these would be planted solid. So it would be 20 plants of a large slip, then 20 plants of a medium slip, and then 20 plants of a small slip. So they weren't mixed together. They're just solid stands of these individual categories of slips. But small, you get about half of that. So it really, when you look at the overall yield, obviously this is due to the half of a stand reduction in those small slips. But really, it's also, one of the things that we can easily see is when you start looking at the grade of roots. So at harvest, where you have small slips, they're producing just a ton of these jumbo roots. And I think it's a function of 2 things. I think it's a function of spacing. So you have a lot of gaps, right? Because you don't have all of those plants that you thought you had in your stand. But I also think it's a stand of nodes. If that thing's only got 1 or 2 nodes in the soil, I think it's just going to produce, it's going to put a lot of its energy into those nodes and just produce those couple big roots, as opposed to, 4 or 5 nodes that are all going to be hopefully producing some roots for you. Just overall size in those size categories. Again, the overall, it's you wouldn't think so, but in those small plots, the average size period is just bigger. Large and medium are pretty similar. And then just kind of a look at Covington, and starting on the left, they're small slips that we planted, and then moving in the middle is medium, and then on the far right are the large slips that we planted. So again, highest plant mortality and poorest plant stands resulted when we planted just those small slips. Large and medium slips were highest yields and probably most uniform of those roots, and that's really what we're keying in on, is the uniformity within the categories of those that we grade out. So with that, I want to thank some mascots and the folks at Morgowitz Produce for hosting these trials, but also Jones Farm and Don Labonte at Louisiana State University for supplying a lot of those slips. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm hoping that Max and Valerio are still on, and I'll go to the chat box here. I saw that there was one. Okay. Let's see if we can bring it up here. Bring up the chat. Let's see. Did we find any virus issues? No. These plants looked really, really good. We did not see any virus symptoms. In all the years that we've been looking at sweet potatoes, that I've been looking at sweet potatoes, if we start with pretty good clean stock, which is mostly what we do, we don't see virus issues in our stuff. I think, however, if we were to continue and this conclusion was made, even with even if it's just regular Irish potatoes, the more you replant your own stuff, the more issues you will run into with diseases, not just viruses. And I do think that this is the case with producing our own slips. I would probably want to start with G2 rootstock from the seed producers down south, and maybe do 1 year of our own, or even if you want to do 50-50. So purchase 50% of what you think you need as G2, and then 50% of your own stuff, and hedge your bet there a little bit. So that's something that we're going to continue to look at and make sure that we're not developing into an issue. Sue, you're asking if there's any insight into grub control. I wish I had more insight. I was excited about that NC 531 because we were being told that it had some insect resistance. You also, for those of you that may not know, we've also done a little bit of work with these Entomopathenogenic Nematodes the last couple of years, for wireworm, but also white grub control. And we do think that there is potential there. However, depending on which white grub you have, these nematodes may work or they may not work, because there's actually a few of these grubs that have developed resistance systems for those nematodes already. So it's interesting. The point that was made about not following grass crops is critical, and that isn't just for sweet potatoes, but also for Irish potatoes. Most of those grubs, including wireworms, love those grass species to actually lay their eggs in, and then so if we can avoid those grass rotations for 3 years at least, I think that'll definitely improve our ability to reduce some of that grub damage in particular. So with that, are there any other questions for Max or Valerio, or any discussion for future projects that you folks might want us to look at? And feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself too if you want to, if you don't want to type it into the chat box. I will ask a general question of the group. Is anybody growing any other varieties in what I showed in our variety trial that you've had good luck with? I am trying to get my hands on some radiance, which is the one that I know the Canadian growers are looking at and are having very good luck with. We are having some issues trying to just get that plant here, but I'm continuing to try.
Hey, Chuck, this is Valerio.
Yep. What do you got?
Are you working with Don Labonte in order to get radiance?
Yes, we have. And
Okay.
last couple of years that we've requested it, they just have not had enough slips to send to us. Not even like 20 slips that we've like just begged him for.
Okay.
I'll just blame you guys taking all the rootstock. That's all. I am now, correct me if I'm wrong, but again, that's kind of an improved Covington variety. Is that what I'm learning?
So radiance is it came out of the LSU crossing nursery. So this is a collaboration between Vineland and LSU. I mentioned in my first slide that to breed sweet potatoes, you first develop a seed, a true seed, right? So each seed is a potential new variety. So Dawn just sent us about 3,000 seeds, and we planted those out. So with sweet potatoes, when you're breeding, you know what the female is, but you don't know what the male is because it's in this polycross. I would say it's probably it's not an improved variety of Covington. I would say, depending on what he had in his nursery, I'd say it's more along the lines of maybe an Orleans or a Biobel.
All right, great, interesting.
But it is much earlier, so it does mature, at least in Canada, at least 11 days before Covington and Orleans. And sometimes it could be as much as 20 days earlier, depending on the year.
Well, we'll put a little more pressure on Dr. Labonte and try to definitely get that variety coming this way, hopefully this year. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
So any other discussion or questions for Max or Valerio? All right, with that, I think we will say a very big thanks to our speakers, Max and Valerio. I greatly appreciate you guys doing this today and not having to travel from your comfortable homes, which is the nice thing about these virtual meetings. I also want to point out to make sure that if you are getting your greenhouses fired up, that Friday, Teresa, our teammate, is doing a greenhouse transplant webinar. So I highly recommend that you get signed up and listen in for that one. And the rest of the series, which I had a slide up earlier of, but you can go to our website and see any of those webinars that are coming up. And again, if you are registered, you can actually go back and view any of those that have already happened or that will happen at any time as soon as we get them posted. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to all of the support staff I've got behind me that are working the webinars. And I wish you guys a phenomenal 2021 season. Good luck.